Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, Prime Minister's Question Time Special, where we skim through the back and forth in Parliament and find out if ever a question is liable to be answered. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. Yes, so will we amaze people and discover that questions have actually been answered?
Well, we're back after, obviously, Parliament's had its Easter break. We've had our Easter break. We're starting to gear
Everybody's had their
ourselves
Easter
up
break.
for the old May the 7th, the local elections. And before we get into those, shall we enjoy the hurly-burly of the dispatch box and PMQs?
Yeah, let's get right into it.
Mr. Speaker, that was a very interesting answer from the Prime Minister. Lord Robertson, who authored the government's Strategic Defence Review, has said the Prime Minister has a corrosive complacency when it comes to defence. Why did he say that?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying I respect Lord Robertson, and I thank him again. I thank him again for carrying out the strategic review. My responsibility is to keep the British people safe, and that is a duty I take seriously. That is why I don't agree with his comments. Last February, that was 7 months after taking office, I took the decision to increase defence spending from 2.3 to 2.6%, paid for by a difficult decision on overseas aid. Last June, at the NATO summit, I committed to raising core defence spending to 3.5%. Last November, Mr. Speaker, the budget committed record funding to defence. I reaffirm those commitments now. The Strategic Defence Review is a 10-year blueprint for national security. The Defence Investment Plan will put that into effect. It will be published as soon as possible. We need to get it right. We inherited plans that were uncosted and undeliverable, and we're not going to repeat those mistakes.
Mr. Speaker, he says he doesn't agree with Lord Robertson. Lord Robertson is a former Labour Defence Secretary, a former NATO Secretary General. He also said, and I quote, "We are underprepared, we are underinsured, we are under attack." He said...
Order. Sorry? Yeah. I don't think it looks good, shouting somebody down at the dispatch box. Calm down.
Mr. Speaker, Lord Robertson's criticisms were of the Prime Minister, and he said Britain's national security is in peril. Our armed forces are at the end of their tether, waiting for this government to fund the Strategic Defence Review. There are still 2 weeks of the parliamentary session left. So why won't the Prime Minister publish the Defence Investment Plan before then?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I remind the House that we put in place the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. Mr. Speaker, let me spell that out. That means we're spending £270 billion over this Parliament. That's £5 billion more this year, with defence funding increasing every year. These are record amounts, Mr. Speaker, decisions of a Labour Prime Minister, a Labour Chancellor and a Labour government. And what a contrast. When they came into office, defence spending was 2.5%. When they left, it was 2.3%. When they came into office, the army was 100,000. When they left office, 72,000. They cut frigates and destroyers by 25%. They cut mine hunters by 50%. She said at the weekend, our defence is the weakest for 400 years. That is what they left behind.
Should we just pause it there for a second?
Well,
I'm just clearing up your mess, Gov.
Well, and to be fair, there is. I actually think that's probably the best exchange we've had since we've been to, since we started doing our PMQ specials. I mean, he was never going to do the, why does John Robertson think you smell? He was never going to answer that question directly, but he did answer the question in terms of relating to, defence spending, which is what the whole, that was the nature of the question. But yes, 14 years. I mean, there is a little bit of we can play bingo, um, and I haven't listened to them in advance, so I am holding my breath to hope that he doesn't do the. And she would have taken us to war with. She would have backed Donald Trump's plan. But we'll go with that. But no, I think it's a perfectly if it's a perfectly reasonable set of questions and answers so far.
Okay. So going back.
And well, and to be fair, yes, everyone now agrees that defence, we need to increase our spending on defence. Well, with the exception of the Greens, I think, who would have us leave NATO. But everyone else kind of seems to recognise that it's there. The danger with all great political kind of arrangements is everyone's always happy to agree on where we should spend more. ...
But where they argue is where you should find the extra money.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see whether that universal panacea is opened in the next exchange.
Yes. Just before we do, just to remind everyone, I've put the links if you wanted to view the show, portrait or landscape, depending on which is your preference. And please do give us a like, follow, subscribe. Just really kind of helps us get the word out there, and let us know what you think in the comments. So okay, let's see how the rest of the exchange went.
Mr. Speaker, he's talking about the biggest sustained increase. Talking about an increase is not the same as giving an increase. The military and the defence industry want to hear about what he's going to do, not him prosecuting past governments. He promised the Defence Investment Plan would be published. He promised that the Defence Investment Plan would be published last autumn. I asked him at PMQs 6 weeks ago when it would be published. He had no idea. It is now the middle of April. What's the hold-up?
Mr. Speaker, I've set out my position. The Defence Investment Plan is the first line-by-line review of defence budgets for 18 years. She talks about talking. If you're going to support and make your country safe, you have to get the right calls on the big issues. She called for us to jump into the war. They can pretend otherwise. I remember walking in, standing here for the first time, saying we would not get drawn into the war, we would not join the offensive, and they all shouted, shame. They remember it. I remember it. They're just embarrassed by it now. A week later, when she realised she'd made a massive error of judgment, she attempted the mother of all U-turns. That didn't work. So this weekend, she said, when I said we should jump into the war, she said this weekend, Mr. Speaker, that what she meant, she was talking about verbal support.
Well, Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions. We've got to concentrate. Kevin Benn.
Just answer the question.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister loves to misrepresent my position on Iran. He does. He loves to misrepresent it. Let's stop talking about what I didn't say. Let's start talking about what he isn't doing. Mr. Speaker, you will recall that on Monday, I offered to work with the Prime Minister to identify the welfare savings we need. What did he say? No thanks. Now that Lord Robertson has said, and I quote, we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget. Will the Prime Minister think again and work with us to find savings to fund defence?
Prime Minister.
She was clear in what she was saying. She said we should give verbal support. I suppose that's standing on the side and saying, get in there, good luck, mate, you've got this. Mr. Speaker, that is her approach. We are reforming welfare and spending more on defence. They did neither. The welfare bill rose by £88 billion on their watch. It soared by £33 billion under the Shadow Chancellor's watch. We're fixing it What did they do? They voted against it. They voted to keep the broken system. So taking advice from the party opposite on reforming welfare and defence spending is like asking Liz Truss how to keep your mortgage down.
Okay, no.
I think I'll just pause again, just to give you a chance to.
Well, for those of you who are in audio only, you will have not seen me dancing in my chair and double fist pumping the air and I didn't know it was coming. Well, her position. Simon, I mean, help me out here because you're a more moderate fellow. Is this become his new? But my father was a toolmaker. Is this just the phrase that he is going to just keep repeating ad nauseum? Well, her position.
Well, I mean, the problem is that she denies that was what she said, and she did say.
Well, well, we can disagree on that one because that I do not believe that's what she said, and
Okay. I'll get the
and
clip for next week.
but well, and again, yeah, I'm happy to do it, but that's now that was what 4 or 5 weeks ago, and every prime minister's question time, it's now well, she said, so you can't listen to a word she says. It maybe it's not wearing as thin with you as it is with me. It just feels to me like
I find it
pitiful childishness.
I find it frustrating that there isn't really a sensible attempt to answer the question.
Yeah.
So there are points to be made, but the point. To be honest with you, obviously, views may seem to differ about whether she said what she said or indeed what she meant by what she said. Nonetheless, the point is that's not the issue right now. The issue is right now, where's this review? Because at this rate, by the time the review is delivered, we'll need another one because it's probably already out of date. Because the global the global threat environment, whatever the proper way to describe that, has completely changed since someone started putting pen to paper and creating a load of bar charts in it. So sorry, mentioning
because
bar charts,
but such a review doesn't happen. It's not an hour one morning that he's dashed that off, is it? It will have been months, if not years, of review, and and for me, it is a valid question when the government commits to publishing it last autumn, and it's now mid-April.
Where's your homework?
But where is your homework? But I do think that this, I don't know. This whole the sort of sneering schoolboy tone of well, she said. You have tried that defence now. I mean, I don't know how many weeks we've been doing this, but it's at least 4 or 5 weeks, isn't it? And in the style of my father was a toolmaker. Well, that's great, but kind of we've all got that now. Can we move on? Can we deal with the issues in hand? Probably not.
See, I can't help but wonder why is he letting the opposition make the case that the only way to find the savings or to find the extra money to spend on defence is to cut welfare spend when actually the most of that is pensions? Why is there not a case being made about yes, we're in dire straits. We've got a dreadful situation. Our armed forces have been underinvested in for decades.
Yep.
We need to do something about that, and we need to agree to do something about that. There's a case to be made about where that money comes from. So, like we said at the top of the show, but to me, it kind of feels like this is almost this is an issue that will transcend this particular parliament, whoever forms the next government, and the next one. So is this not like one of the other massive things that are facing the government? Is that not something you try to build consensus on and deliver a way forward rather than the point scoring, rather than the mug chucking? I don't know. Am I just too naive?
I think, I guess, Simon, in this case, there's an element of two things being true at the same time, which is that, Starmer's kind of, I'm not talking to you about welfare because your team increased it by 88 billion. Yes, they did. And it's expanding almost exponentially now. and there is a piece of, the government itself tried to not, it was reported as cutting welfare, but what they tried to do is put in some safeguards to stop it expanding as quickly, that their own backbenchers turned on them and defeated. So I think there is, and I think probably in this case, because the, ex-Labour Defence Secretary who did this review specifically called out welfare in the remarks that he made over the weekend. So I guess, which is inviting, it was a free hit then for Kemi. But I guess if the ex-Labour person doing the review is also saying, you can't spend all the money on welfare and all the money on defence, then I guess that does legitimise the discussion in some way.
Well, I don't think Kemi Badenoch needed any help to figure.
No, I
that
don't. She would have gone there anyway
to find the money.
Yeah.
But in the same way that the last place she would be looking if she was in government would be to, to tax the multinationals or to tax the billionaires, for example. Whereas that's also something that, for reasons passing understanding, this government also seems unwilling to countenance, despite having a massive majority. But it's up to them, it's their case to govern. But I'm just curious that they don't seem to be making the case as to why. It's just point scoring.
Yeah. And well, I think, again, it's a bigger issue, isn't it, in terms of that whole, the whole change that they put themselves in with this. We will not raise the headline levels of income tax. They have made, that they set out their stall before. And, again, if they get credit for anything, they, whilst their taxes gone up elsewhere, they have stuck to that promise so far.
Yeah.
Let's hear some more.
Let's let them play on, because otherwise we'll talk and we won't be playing any of their clips.
This is so poor from the Prime Minister. This is Labour MPs are laughing. Labour MPs are laughing, Mr. Speaker. This is a moment of profound national seriousness. And what are they doing? They're promoting sex toys in Parliament. That's what they're doing. Mr. Speaker, it gives a whole new meaning to fiddling while Rome burns. Mr. Speaker, it is being... That's what they're doing, Mr. Speaker. Let's get back to the issue of the Defence Investment Plan and defence spending. It is being reported that the Treasury is asking the MOD to make £3.5 billion worth of cuts this year. He won't fund our military because he wants to fund more welfare. That's why he has a welfare plan to 2031, but no defence investment plan at all. Now that the Chagos surrender deal is dead, will the Prime Minister put the billions saved from ditching Chagos into defence, or is that going into welfare as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are spending more on defence. Record amounts on defence. £270 billion in this Parliament, £5 billion extra. And she talks about the Chancellor. It's because of the decisions of this Chancellor we've got the biggest boost to defence spending since the Cold War. We've also got the biggest pay rise for our armed forces for over 20 years. We've also got the biggest investment in military housing for over half a century. What did they do at the budget? They voted against all of that.
That sounds like he doesn't want to spend the Chagos money on defence. But, Mr. Speaker, Labour MPs will know Lord Robertson, a former Defence Secretary, a former NATO Secretary General. He is Labour through and through. They all need to think about why he stuck his head above the parapet. I went through the Strategic Defence Review with Lord Robertson last year. The Lib Dems and Reform refused to meet him. No other party is taking this seriously. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister a very specific question. In January 2024, Conservatives approved an upgrade of destroyers like HMS Dragon so they can better intercept ballistic missiles. In July 2024, the Prime Minister paused that plan. Will he immediately approve and fund that critical upgrade now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Dragon was commissioned by a Labour government, as it happened. But she stands there and says, please forget the fact that we hollowed out the armed forces. Please clear up our mess. I went to the Gulf last week and thanked our armed forces for protecting British lives. She said we should have jumped into the war without thinking about the consequences. Then said, oh no, we shouldn't be in the war the next week. Now she says, what I meant was we should give verbal support.
Order. The front bench, I expect them to be quiet here. I also expect it, but it's the same people. I suspect next week you won't be in for PMQs if it carries on. Prime Minister.
In addition to saying her position is we should just say to Americans, get in there, she insulted our armed forces, Mr. Speaker, saying that they were just hanging around. These were pilots who, within 2 hours of this conflict, were up, risking their lives, taking missiles out of the sky, and she insulted them. And she's never apologised for that. She said a few weeks ago that serious times call for serious people. She is not one of them.
Shred David, leader of the Liberal Democrat.
Shall we quickly round off the Badenoch and Starmer bit?
It started so well, didn't it? And then it degenerated into that final question was very specific. You know, we saw the kind of HMS Dragon. You know, it took about a week to get it to leave port in Portsmouth, and I believe now it's pulled in somewhere having some repairs. And it was a very specific, are you going to restart the investment in that? And well, our listeners heard the answer. So it started so well.
Yeah, why was there not some other answer of we made that decision because actually there's a better bit of kit coming along that actually is more important and more useful to install, for example, on those destroyers, rather than the bit of kit that your lot had planned. That would be a sensible answer, and explain it and take. I just don't.
Yeah.
The point scoring isn't pleasing anybody other than each other's own side, and no one's kind of convincing, and no one's getting a straight answer. But I feel like she's pummeling punch after punch of, you are just not in control of this. You don't know what's going on.
Well, and there's an element, isn't there, of failing to the answer to the question leads you to only two conclusions. Either well, there's a couple of conclusions, isn't there? Either you don't know the answer, or the answer that you've got is so weak you'd rather not give it. So you change tack, whatever. And I don't think either of those is kind of okay. So I think it's time to rev up your unicycles, come in on a bungee cord. Here we go.
Is
Sir Ed Davey.
Sir Ed Davey. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the words of the Prime Minister about the Southport inquiry and also the 37th anniversary of the Hillsborough tragedy? Our thoughts are with all the families affected and the survivors, and I hope he will deliver on the Hillsborough law. Today, Mr. Speaker, also marks the 3rd anniversary of the start of the devastating civil war in Sudan. I hope he will recommit to real action in the face of the world's greatest humanitarian catastrophe. Mr. Speaker, in a phone call with Sky News last night, President Trump has threatened to rip up his trade deal with the UK as punishment for us not joining his idiotic war in Iran. Mr. Speaker, this must be the last straw. Surely the Prime Minister can't send our King to meet a man who treats our country like a mafia boss running a protection racket.
Minister.
Can I join him in his comments about Sudan? We often overlook the fact this is the greatest humanitarian crisis facing the world at the moment. My position on the Iran war has been clear from the start. We're not going to get dragged into this war. It is not our war. And a lot of pressure has been applied to me to take a different course. And that pressure included what happened last night. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to yield. It is not in our national interest to join this war, and we will not do so. I know where I stand. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the King's visit, the purpose of the visit is to mark the 250th anniversary of relations and independence, obviously, of the US. The monarchy is an important reminder of the long-standing bonds and enduring relationship between our two countries, which are far greater than anyone who occupies any particular office at any particular time.
Sir Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, President Trump is one of the most unpredictable people we have seen on the world stage, and I hope he does not embarrass our monarch. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, last year the Prime Minister claimed he'd done some special deal, so Brits will be able to sail through e-gates at EU airports. But that's not the experience of families returning from holiday this week. Long queues at borders and passport controls are the latest symbol of the Brexit disaster. But they're also a symbol of this government's failure to repair that damage. So will the Prime Minister apologise for misleading British travellers? And can he tell them when they will be able to sail through passport control?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've made it very clear that I think our national interest lies in closer relationship with the EU on defence, security, energy and the economy. And I was very pleased that at last year's summit we did negotiate an agreement on e-gates, and we're pushing hard on that. We have another summit this year where I intend not just to make good on what we've already agreed, but to go closer to the EU in the relations that we have.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr.
So we'll leave it there. It is an interesting thing that it is actually the government that essentially send the monarch. It's not. I understand it from elsewhere that it's not really a personal decision on behalf of His Majesty as to whether to go or not. It's the government's request and instruction.
And can I just say that I think is the best answer that's been given in terms of the fact that it is a symbolic journey for 250 years since independence, and history is a wonderful thing in that it keeps evolving, and Donald Trump's time will pass. It will pass. And there's an element of, at the moment, you're dealing with somebody who is completely unstable, possibly is actually mentally unwell. And the number of people calling for Sir Keir Starmer to pick a fight with him or call him out, I just don't understand it, because he will not listen. And there's an element of yes, he's threatened to tear up the trade deal, but he threatens, and fortunately most of the time he backs down. So why would you get your forehead up to a madman and start behaving in an inflammatory and aggressive manner? I don't understand it. For me, the kings.
I don't know that that's what Sir Davey was calling for. I think what he was after was essentially questioning: is it a wise thing to put our monarch in the situation of going to see Trump, putting him in that situation? And I agree with you. I think Starmer actually made the strongest and most statesmanly response to the situation, the description of the situation. That, to be honest, had he not done the point scoring that he'd done for the previous 10 minutes with Kemi Badenoch, that would have been a much better I'm the grown-up in the room.
I'd want that on my highlights reel, not the nonsense that had gone before.
Yeah.
Interesting. And go on, passport, e-gates. It's near the top of my list.
But for people that travel frequently, it is, and it is a major inconvenience. And if it's something that's on the list that's being worked on to improve from the steps that the government are taking to reset our relationship with the EU, then at the end of the day, surely that is in itself a valid question. What's happening to this thing? Because that's the most visible evidence of the problem that people we see on a day-to-day basis. People that aren't exporters, people that are just going on holiday and coming back from holiday, etc. Those are the ones that will experience it.
Yeah, I can't get excited at international travellers having to stand in a queue for a bit longer. That's it, with everything going on in the world at the moment, in terms of the first world of first world problems. Yeah, but let's focus on the positive. I think in our journey of prime ministers sort of questions not being answered, I think we can both agree that there was a really valid question and a really good answer. I think we should take that as a win.
Well, 1 out of 6 isn't bad, I guess.
Well, you've got to take your wins where you can, Simon. And if anything, a Labour Prime Minister, as they head towards May the 7th, they can have a T-shirt with "You've got to take your wins where you can" on that. So on that piece of political insight, you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast, PMQs Spectacular. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury. Remember, the deadline to register to vote in May's local elections is 11:59 p.m. on Monday the 20th of April. Use the QR code on screen to take you to the Electoral Commission's website, where there are further details about registering to vote, as well as information where you can confirm where you would need to vote if you're voting in person on the day. Other deadlines apply to register for postal or proxy voting. Don't forget, if you're voting in person on May the 7th, you'll need to take photo ID to be able to vote. If you're not sure what photo ID counts, scan the QR code on screen or go to the Electoral Commission's website, where there are further details, including information about how to apply for a free voter authority certificate, which you will be able to use to vote in person on the day.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.